For decades, Africa's money system was built to keep the continent dependent. Former French colonies were locked into using the CFA franc, a currency printed in Paris and controlled by Europe. Even after gaining independence, these nations had little control over their own money. Every major decision was still tied to foreign capitals. Other African countries turned to the US dollar for trade. This created a difficult trap. Their economies became tied to the policies of the US Federal Reserve, a bank thousands of miles away. When America raised interest rates, African economies suffered. When America's market shook, Africa felt the earthquake. As the saying goes, when America sneezes, Africa catches pneumonia. This system wasn't built by accident. It was carefully designed to keep African countries weak, dependent, and easy to control. By holding the power of money, foreign powers could quietly influence governments, shape national policies, and drain resources without firing a single bullet. But something is changing. Across the continent, leaders and communities are waking up to this hidden financial cage. The question is no longer whether Africa can survive within this system. It's whether it can break free from it. And the first signs of rebellion came from an unexpected place. In early 2024, something unusual happened. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, offered a $300 million loan to a group of West African countries. But there was a catch. The loan would be guaranteed using Africa's gold as collateral. On paper, it looked like just another financial deal. But in reality, it was something much bigger. A new way to tighten control. If the countries failed to pay back the loan, the IMF and its partners would gain the right to seize their gold reserves. Most leaders saw no other choice. Their economies were struggling. Their currencies were weak. Accepting the deal felt like the only way to keep their governments running. But one man said no. Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso refused to sign the agreement. He called it what many had been too afraid to say aloud, an economic coup. His rejection shocked international institutions. For decades, African leaders had quietly accepted such deals. Now, for the first time in years, someone had challenged the IMF openly. Traoré's defiance was more than a political move. It was a spark. Across the continent, his words started conversations in parliaments, universities, and even village markets. People began asking, why are we giving away our wealth to get loans? Why can't Africa fund its own future? When Traoré rejected the gold deal, he didn't just block a contract. He pulled back the curtain on a system that had quietly shaped Africa's destiny for decades. For years, imported goods like food and medicine suddenly became too expensive for ordinary people. Meanwhile, export money flowed into the hands of foreign buyers, who paid in weak local currencies. Farmers, traders, and workers gained nothing. The economy was built to serve outside markets, not the people living within Africa. This was not a mistake. It was designed for control. The IMF created loan systems that were almost impossible to fully repay. Every year, African nations had to return for new loans, each one tied to tougher conditions. Schools and hospitals lost funding, public spending was cut, and economies were reshaped to depend on foreign powers. Unlike colonial soldiers with guns, this control came through contracts, spreadsheets, and polite diplomatic language. It was colonization without violence, quiet but powerful. Many leaders signed because they believed there was no other option. By the 1990s, entire African economies were built around IMF programs, exporting raw materials, importing expensive goods, cutting social services, and endlessly paying back debts. The winners were global financial centers. The losers were ordinary African citizens. Those who resisted, like Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso, were punished, isolated, or even killed. The IMF's power lasted not because it was invisible, but because it was seen as unavoidable. But Traoré's rejection changed that. By calling it an economic coup, he said out loud what millions had quietly felt for years. The IMF doesn't save nations, it controls them. His words turned whispers into headlines and sparked conversations on the streets. And here lies the turning point. Once a system of exploitation is exposed, it starts to lose its power. Africa is no longer asking whether the IMF's model is broken. It's asking how to build something better. For the first time in generations, the path forward is not being drawn in Washington or Paris. It's being drawn in African capitals by African leaders, banks, and citizens. The first pillar of this new path is financial independence. Institutions like Afreximbank and the African Development Bank are no longer side players. They are becoming central pillars of Africa's financial system. These banks don't demand gold or uranium as collateral. Instead, they lend based on Africa's own potential, with repayment terms shaped by African priorities. Emergency funds and capital reserves, built and backed by African states themselves, are slowly reducing the desperation that once drove governments to the IMF's door. For decades, the IMF acted as the lender of last resort. Now, Africa is building its own safety net on its own soil. The second pillar is intra-African trade. The African Continental Free Trade Area (AfCFTA) is more than a political agreement. It's a quiet revolution. For too long, raw materials left Africa cheaply, only to return as expensive finished goods. AfCFTA's mission is simple but powerful. Break that cycle. By lowering trade barriers between African countries, the continent can build value chains that keep wealth circulating at home. For example, Malian cotton could supply Nigerian factories, Burkina Faso gold could fund Ghanaian refineries, and Kenyan tech could power South African markets. This is not just about economics, it's psychological. It shows that Africa doesn't need permission from Europe or America to trade with itself. The third pillar is monetary independence. If the Phoenix dollar was meant to be a new digital chain, African leaders are now imagining digital currencies of their own. These are not fantasies. Real discussions are happening in Addis Ababa, Abuja, and Johannesburg. A digital African currency, backed by Africa's own reserves and managed through continental institutions, could finally break the dollar's grip on trade and financing. This is more than economic reform. It's a fight to reclaim sovereignty. For years, the West used money as a tool of control, first the franc, then the dollar. But now, Africa is preparing to flip the script and build a system that serves its own people, not foreign powers. The fourth pillar of this new path is industrialization. Controlling resources is not enough if gold, oil, and uranium keep leaving the continent in raw form. New African leaders are not just taking control, they are building. Burkina Faso is expanding its gold refining capacity, so more value stays inside the country. Nigeria is investing in defense industries, reducing dependence on foreign arms. Mozambique is pushing forward with energy infrastructure, making sure local resources power local development. The goal is not isolation, it's transformation. Africa wants to process, build, and multiply the value of its own resources before they leave its borders. The fifth and most powerful pillar is unity. The military governments of the Sahel, once dismissed as unstable, are now working together. They are making joint decisions on mining contracts, currency reforms, and economic strategy. This collective stand is spreading beyond the Sahel, from the Horn of Africa to Southern Africa. Leaders now understand that real sovereignty cannot be defended by one country alone. It needs a continental shield. This is why Traore's defiance matters so deeply. By rejecting one gold-backed deal, he exposed the entire system of dependency. He turned silence into a rallying cry. For the first time in modern history, Africa isn't just resisting Western control. It is building systems that make that control irrelevant. If Afreximbank can replace IMF loans, if AfCFTA can anchor trade within the continent, if African currencies can cut their ties to the dollar, then the IMF's power doesn't just weaken, it collapses. What started as a fight over $300 million in gold has become something much bigger. The death rattle of a financial empire and the birth of an African century. And history has shown us one thing clearly. Once the fire of sovereignty is lit, it doesn't fade, it spreads.